Case studies of the lab profile in management and business. These case studies will help managers and supervisors learn what they can achieve by using the lab profile. When I was introduced to these concepts in 1979 in a linguistics workshop, I saw them as a game changer for business because it could revolutionize management, product development, as well as sales and marketing. So I decided to specialize in these concepts and make it easier for folks to understand, elicit, and utilize a person's patterns. Hi, I'm Roger Bailey. If you use a set of questions to elicit a person's metaprograms, I probably developed those questions. I first learned about these kinds of patterns people have in 1979. I had been a programmer analyst at IBM since '66, and at that time, in '79, I was working as staff to the director of IBM's most popular mainframe operating system. It was called VM. By the way, over my years at IBM, I had earned degrees in anthropology and counseling. I didn't see metaprograms as programs. I understood them to be the functional architecture of our brain's ability to execute the programs in our brain. For me, these tendencies are built into how our brain, our mental processing platform, performs our mental and our physical tasks. I see these metaprograms, these patterns, as the boundaries, the limits within which our brains perform tasks. If I operate away from, my brain is constantly gathering information about what is going wrong or could go wrong. If I operate toward, I don't gather that away from kind of data. I focus more on goals and rewards and other benefits. Both toward and away from have a valid purpose on the job as we process information about our modern world. Some of us specialize in one of these and others specialize in the other, and a few of us can easily switch back and forth between these two ways of gathering and processing information about our world. I had to develop a vocabulary for describing what I was working with. So I used patterns as the name of the individual ways of thinking and acting, such as toward and away from. And I used category as the name of sets of patterns, so that toward and away from are the patterns in the category of motivation direction. Over my last year at IBM and for the following decades, I have presented my metaprogram findings and developments at NLP, business, and leadership conferences throughout the United States and Canada. I have been teaching my versions of these metaprogram patterns and the questions I developed to elicit a person's patterns. When I left IBM in late 1980, I started to teach these patterns throughout the Americas and Europe. I was also training and consulting with companies. Over the next few years, I discovered and expanded the number of patterns I was working with from 37 to 54, and expanded the number of categories I was working with from 10 to 17. I changed the name Metaprograms to the Language and Behavior Profile, Lab Profile, because my target market for my training and consulting was the business environment, and the name Language and Behavior Lab Profile was easier to promote than calling it metaprograms. Okay, that is the history of how I developed the lab profile. But I'm sure what you really want me to tell you about are my lab profile case studies in management and business. These depicted experiences are not typical. Your background, education, experience, and work ethic may differ. These cases are used as examples and are not a guarantee of success. And of course, your results may vary. Case 1. In 1980, a regional airline based in Texas wanted to improve customer satisfaction, so they asked me to profile existing flight attendants to see which patterns were common among flight attendants with no complaints and which other patterns were common among flight attendants with many complaints. There was one lab profile category which was associated with complaints versus non-complaints, and the complaint pattern often causes a person to be a complaint generator. So the airline installed an activity in their recruitment process which highlighted this set of patterns, and those who were complaint generators were not invited back for the second interview. The airline was in a dramatic growth period with hundreds of new airplanes as well as new pilots and of course flight attendants to be hired and trained. And because they were now using their new screening process for those who had the most contact with customers, they quickly became the lowest complaint ratio airline in the U.S. and maintained that status for decades. Case 2. A gold and diamond jewelry manufacturer wanted to grow his business from $2 million to $5 million annually. He was selling his jewelry and window dressings to mom-and-pop jewelry stores in the USA's Midwest. After he took a public lab profile training program with me in Dallas in '82, he realized that one of the questions I taught in my course is one his sales staff should have been using with their mom and pop jewelry store owners. He immediately started calling his client store owners, and over the next few weeks he collected the data this question elicited for a representative cross-section of those store owners. He discovered that a vital piece of the sales motivation process for these owners was not being addressed by his sales pitch. So he called each of his sales staff and taught them the change to his sales pitch. Over the next month, all of his sales staff improved their sales results between 50 and 125%. And of course, his overall annual sales volume improved dramatically. He was ecstatic that his overall performance was doing so well. He passed his $5 million goal. So he settled into boosting his manufacturing production to match the new sales volume coming from his better performing sales approach. But another change was in the works. He received a call from his closest competitor in that Midwest market. This man told him he was retiring and closing his business and asked if he would like to hire any of his sales staff before he shut down and let them all go. My client was able to use the lab profile by phone to select many of those available salespeople whose profiles matched his own well-performing salespeople. This additional bump in his business started happening in '87 during an economic downturn in the USA's economy. Within a couple of years, he was closing in on $10 million annually, which was double his initial business goal. In 1980, an entrepreneur had developed a handheld electronic device to replace the card deck used by utility company meter readers, gas, electricity, water. Each day it would have sorted the meter reader's route in exactly the same way the old card deck had the meter reader's route. Of course, that was 4 decades ago, and now in the 2020s, there's no more meter readers because a utility company vehicle drives down the street, pings the meters, and gets the current readings without all the manpower being used to collect usage data from all those utility meters. But back in the 80s, a lot of manpower was devoted to looking at each meter, manually coding meter readings on cards, transporting all those cards from all those meter readers to a central office, and with folks keying in the data or loading those cards into a computerized card reader. There was a lot of people hours being spent doing all that data collection, and with so many people involved, the whole process was error-prone. So a handheld device to replace that deck of cards was an amazing advancement, but those utility companies were not listening to him. I was called in to find a way for all those targeted utility company executives to be open to changing their data collection from the old way to the new handheld way. The real problem was that the existing culture for utility companies involved not changing anything. Think about it. The culture for a water company is that the water pressure to remain unchanged. The culture for an electric utility is that the electricity never changes. The culture for a gas company is for the service to never change. So trying to sell this new approach was a gut-wrenching affront to those utility company executives who have spent decades trying in every way possible to keep things from changing. So showing them this new technology was met with universal rejection. The roadblocks to accepting this new technology dropped when we were able to help the handheld technology company change their messaging from "it's a new technology" to "it's the same as a deck of cards and it's waterproof." In the late 70s, a Dallas-based computer tech company had built a very successful business installing modern computer processing services for governments all around the world. The recruiting department within that company, which was searching for programmer analysts to be placed in these around-the-world installations, asked for help in improving their recruiting process. The recruiting process was to approach experienced computer programmer analysts and get them interested in taking on their long-term projects at exotic locations for very high pay plus expenses. Many thousands of programmers were being recruited every year. Actually, I was even approached to interview with them when I was at IBM. The second step in their recruiting process was to line up a call between the recruited prospect and a hiring manager in their company. The recruiter staff had an 83% success rate of getting their recruits accepted and hired by those hiring managers. My lab profile job was to increase that percentage. I was able to interview 6 of those managers who were actively hiring new programmer analysts, and I discovered that all of them based much of their successful hiring approach on something they called challenge. They wanted their new people to love a challenge. So I taught all of the company's recruiting staff to make sure their recruits were comfortable with having a challenge and to use that word when being interviewed by the hiring managers. After that, the recruiter's job accepted success rate jumped from 83% to 97%. A manager of multiple franchise haircutting salons was having a turnover problem with his hairstylist across all of his salons. He wanted a solution where those he signed up would happily stay for years. He used the lab profile to profile his existing long-term stylist across all his salons. All of the patterns of the lab profile have motivating language associated with each pattern. He was able to write a recruiting ad for stylists, which included the motivating language of all of the common patterns of his own group of long-term stylists. 9 stylists responded to that targeted employment ad. 8 of them were a perfect match for the profile of long-term stylists, so his ad was very successful. He asked the stylist who was a mismatch for that target profile why he answered the ad. The guy said he did not like the ad and was not going to respond. But his wife, who was also a stylist, read the ad, really liked it, and she insisted he respond. So the manager talked with the wife, offered her the job, and she accepted and joined his group of long-term stylists. A bank called me to help them solve a sudden dramatic increase in keystroke errors by tellers and data entry staff. It was an emergency, and they asked me to fly there the next day. I arrived and was met by the Vice President of Operations. We walked past the tellers to the elevators. On the way up to the executive suite, I asked about their change in management. She was surprised and said there's no official announcement yet. She wanted to know how I knew that. I told her that I saw that none of the tellers had the cloud of Post-it notes that great bank tellers normally had to remind them of all of the codes of all of those hard-to-remember transactions. And I thought that there must be a new president who ordered a clean desk policy, which has caused their keystroke error problem. High-end bank tellers are focused outside themselves. In the lab profile, I described it as an external focus. And they had a tendency to need external reinforcement to perform their jobs well. Those Post-it notes are their reinforcement to make sure they perform their keystroke tasks flawlessly. An inexperienced new bank president might not know about this need of these critical employees, and that new clean desk policy might easily result in a sudden increase in keystroke errors. The solution was a keystroke code sheet framed in a bank letterhead, which was well designed and should be posted at each teller's position in the bank, where those special codes might be needed. They made that form, and the keystroke error stopped. I was called by a company in New England, up in the northeast corner of the USA, to help them prepare for a new general manager. The company was a mail order supplier of cassette tapes and CDs of fringe music, folk, Celtic, medieval, stuff like that. They wanted help in deciding which new general manager candidate to hire. When I visited, they talked with me about how the new general manager would prepare and guide the company in modernizing their whole process. This included building a modern computerized warehousing facility. Their current warehouse was an old barn with their products stacked in old feed boxes. They also asked how existing staff might fit in with a new way of doing business. I showed them that their current warehousing and picking staff have to be the kind of folks who work outside the box. But the new modern warehousing systems are better performed by procedural folks. I was able to prepare them by letting them know which current employees could not accept the upcoming changes and would leave on their own as those changes started impacting the way they had to work. The lab profile way of managers and supervisors is to recognize what a person can do and cannot do, so that tasks are assigned to those who will be successful performing the task. The lab profile is useful as an employee selection skill as well as training, assessment, and motivation skill. These case studies can help you recognize and understand the kinds of benefits managers and supervisors can achieve by using the lab profile. In the lab profile training program, you learn the precise tactics you need so that you successfully apply the lab profile in your work with all your clients.